But it's interesting how you can kind of like I'd start to identify types when you watch that over and over. It depends on the circumstances, like I
involved too.
yeah, but certain people I find seem to drift into certain roles. Like just for example, I've worked in a few different kitchens, and I find there's a very consistent dynamic to the atmosphere, basically. And there's different people that I would say filled it. I like to think of at the beginning of the Key of Solomon where it says, don't think of the archangels as beings, but as offices. And a group dynamic does have certain offices that different people occupy at different times, I would say.
Fair enough, whereas in your kitchen, right, the line cook leaves, you get another line cook, he fulfills the same role.
Yeah.
Even though it's a different person.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about the role in terms of their job, but I mean their role within the social structure.
But yeah, that their job could
No, but
cement their role in that social structure.
Yeah, to a degree. But I mean, any group's going to be like that. Like, look at a simple thing like a local body. You've got like a treasurer. You have the body master. You have someone who's probably in charge of controlling their web presence. Someone who's in charge of disseminating written information, so on and so forth, like that. And like you say, different people can hold those different roles, but there's going to be an element of similarity to the social dynamic that's not going to have to do with what role within the body necessarily the person has.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know with bands, that's always the biggest issue. It's always like everybody. Eventually, you're going to have problems and people getting on each other's nerves, and just issues that arise, and it's unavoidable. It's like totally unavoidable.
Yeah.
Some fucking lead singer who's like an
Yeah, you get some
egomaniac.
fucking lead singer with his fucking beard and his hoodie.
I guess my interest in the AA is that I come from a Golden Dawn background, and I often get these things in my mind that are like, I'm missing out on something because I'm not pursuing the thelemic path. Like, what am I missing out by not incorporating Crowley into the work? Because in the Golden Dawn, unless, maybe at the higher levels, but I don't think so. I don't think Thelema ever comes into play in the Golden Dawn. And I just think, like, am I limiting myself, or are there things that I'm never going to be able to accomplish because I'm not incorporating Thelema? Because, there isn't the yoga, there isn't all the other things that you were talking about.
Yeah, I would probably say yes, and Crowley would say yes. That's why he made it a requirement to look at the thelemic books in the AA system. To really understand what a person would be missing out on, you have to do it. It's not really something that can be proven because it is an individual thing. Crowley was one of the most articulate writers about his spiritual experiences. Most people have a much more difficult time putting those kind of attainments into words and sort of breaking them down the way he does. And even he, in his introduction to the Vision and the Voice, he makes it very clear. He says, other people can read this and get something out of it, but no one could possibly understand what it meant to me because of the images that it was, and they were so personal and particularly, directed at me. So I think those kind of attainments that happen with Thelema, they use a symbol system that goes on through your own personal psyche. When I personally did the Dominus Lemnis thing, I went through a period which was of just drastic upheaval completely out of nowhere, and the events in my life corresponded very much to what the things I was supposed to be learning to prove myself in that grade, basically. But it was radically personal. Like, I could theoretically explain it, but it would take me hours in background, and this is who this person is, and this is how they relate to this, and so on and so forth. It would be a long time. Crowley actually bothers to do that with his Magus initiation, which is the interesting part. That's why it's so good to look at the Confessions.
I guess that's kind of a good thing to touch on, is because I guess the AA is basically derived from the same sort of system as the Golden Dawn, which was Crowley's system, and the Golden Dawn's goal was basically, like, it didn't have the crossing the abyss and all that sort of thing. So there's that, like, fundamental difference between.
Well, that's what I think where mysticism comes in there, where the AA incorporates yoga or mysticism to balance magic in a way. Because when Crowley left the Golden Dawn, what did he do? He went to Ceylon or Sri Lanka to study Buddhism, and that was his equilibration to his Golden Dawn work, was his conversion to Buddhism, which was later disrupted by his Holy Guardian Angel operation. And I think that when he started the AA, which wasn't too long after that, he did so around the time that he was decimating putting out 777, basically, which was a big deal. There was a court case. Some others didn't want it published, and this is where secrecy is the enemy of truth comes in. Now we had a secret document that was only held by a particular group in a particular order that is a system for understanding the astral plane, because if you don't memorize 777, your astral experiences will be completely incoherent. And so now this is suddenly public, and now we live in a point where we can literally go online in seconds and look at all these tables and see all these things. And that's going from a very information that opens up all of this, because if you can't match the astral plane, you can't get past the first sort of stage. And it's that brings the potential for self-initiation there.
So it almost seems like the AA is like his middle pillar then, because he did
Yeah.
the Western system, then he went Eastern, and then that was his reconciliation.
I think that's a good way of putting it.
Can you, you're differentiating between like mysticism and magic. Can you
Yeah.
explain that to me, please?
Well, basically, these are two labels that Crowley put on the different practices, where essentially are you familiar with the 2 = 0 formula that he uses? It's his explanation of the universe, because he explains that unity in and of itself is not a coherent concept. You can't talk about unity because it necessarily contains everything, and any kind of like sense of reason or logic involves differentiation. So he resolved unity as the equation 2 = 0, 2 being the opposites and 0 being the annihilation of that opposite. And he attributed these two parts of the formula to magic with the 2 and mysticism with the 0, where magic is about the creative will trying to create change and conformity with will, and mysticism is about annihilating the self, essentially, destroying the ego and overcoming everything within. Essentially, he saw one path as inwardly directed and one path as outwardly directed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, whereas mysticism would include things like yoga and meditation, and
Yeah.
were inward, whereas magic is ceremonial.
Yeah, and that's what later on he tries to combine the two by having essentially inward ceremonies and stuff like that.
Doing a ritual in your astral
Yeah.
form. Yeah.
Or just like HHH, the meditations in there. Dominus Day is another perfect example where you're like driving all your sensations up into the Ajna chakra and trying to destroy thoughts before they arise. And those are all very yogic practices. Sometimes they're very visualized, like he says with Dominus Day, to visualize like the Egyptian crocodile Sebek devouring the thought, or basically to create a destroyer in your own mind that will destroy the thought as it arises, which is in itself a thought, but later on that's supposed to get all transcended, which is where you get past the RC, the middle, call it middle order.
What number is HHH?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head, which reminds me of what I was going to tell everybody, to know the Libras by their numbers.
No, because, yeah.
Although Crowley refers to it in
I
his...
find it easier to look them up by number.
It's not just easy to look him up. Crowley, most of the time, HHH he refers to as such, but a lot of the time when he's referring to Libras, he doesn't tell you the title, he just gives you a number. So that's why sometimes reading through these instructions starts taking a long time. You forget what you're thinking about, because if you have to go look up the number every time, then it gets confusing, whereas if you know the numbers right away, then it goes a lot more smoothly. It's easier to get through the base construction.
Which is actually kind of good anyway, because it's like they're numbered the way they are for a reason as well. It relates to the content, so it sort of reinforces a lot of the Kabbalistic sort of.
Yeah, usually the
correspondences
numbers have
and all that.
Kabbalistic meaning or something.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure they all do.
So you don't have a recommendation for like which AA order anyone should start out with?
No, I would just say to look for whether or not the person's A, asking for money, B, appears to know what they're talking about, and C, is specific about what it is that they do, where they're kind of focused, and what their studies entail. I'm not saying that your studies would necessarily have to be corresponding to those. In fact, it might be better if they're not, because that way you won't be subject to as much personal influence as you would in other cases. That's the kind of way that you prevent a cult of personality type situation from forming.